Just to really sort of sum up, I mean, Nigel, you're the medical director here. One of the things that's interesting is these alternative models. And, you know, talking to the NHS yesterday, you realise that actually the complexity of health problems that are presented by the people who you work with and whose experience you use in developing the models, this is something that has an influence way beyond just this client group of people. So to what extent do you think the faculty will have that kind of influence on the NHS and the development of much more intelligent and clever and naughty health services like have just been described?
I absolutely passionately believe that people living on the margins of society are the best litmus test, the canaries in the mine for our healthcare systems. And if we can make our healthcare systems work for people who are struggling with such deprivation, that they'll work brilliantly well for the rest of us that have much lower level of challenge. So we are in the vanguard of developing new and better ways of making the healthcare system work for all of us.
And Laura, are you finding that, because you've got as you said, a mixed group of patients or a kind of population that you serve, and are you finding that what you're developing at the really sharp end is actually having a good effect at the less sharp end?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've definitely benefited from being in the Pathway network, and some of the stuff that Trudy developed, you know, we blatantly just adapted for our patients and have learned from each other. It's very synergistic, and we just, I think, from my experience is there's a lot of patients live in areas of deprivation, and they're never going to be a specialist practice. So, and the NHS can be better for that massive cohort of people. So in Greater Manchester, something like 30% of our practices are in the national lowest 15% of deprivation. So that's a huge amount of our workforce and our patients. So the lessons that are learned from the real sharp end in homelessness and other inclusion health projects can be fed up. You've just got to scale it differently and work it slightly differently. And the crossover skills are just incredible, like I think as clinicians.
And to what extent is it about money or design?
So we
values and aim.
We operate within the same budget as like every other GP practice now, and it's hard. It is hard. Look, there isn't huge amounts of money in it, but you know, just as Gina said, your values are so important, your culture is so important, your training of the staff is so important. Things like our toddler group costs us nothing. You know, we have a room. You know, it really is pennies, but it holds a group of vulnerable women, it builds relationship, it's a great way of getting some softer parenting messages in. It's a kind of no-brainer, really. But so you know, if I was offered more money, would I spend it wisely? Absolutely. If you're going to give it to me, please. But, you know, I think sometimes we put money constraints around stuff that isn't always about money.
And do you think, Nigel, that this raises a bigger question for the faculty in the end and Pathway, that actually there's a value in trying to affect education? Because you've all talked about how important it is actually to generate a different set of values and behaviours in future health professionals.
Absolutely, that's right. and people like Laura are inspiring the next generation of nurses and doctors and other clinicians coming through, and I'm optimistic about the future because I see that compassion spreading out in ripples into the whole healthcare establishment.
Well, it's been fantastic. It's a real privilege for me to sit here and just listen to this in an area about which I know nothing. So thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed, Laura. So if you'd like to thank Laura as well. And just to close up the conference, Leslie Morphy is the chair of Pathway, and she's going to say a few words in conclusion.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm not going to say very much at all, but I did want to do some thank yous. First of all, obviously, I think this has been fantastically well organised. People seem to be constantly in the right place, and we seem to be being helped to be in the right place, and this is obviously down to Neil Stewart Associates, and particularly Karen and Katrina, who's actually come back from retirement today, obviously because she loves us so much. So that's all fairly amazing. I think actually this is quite complicated, this conference, and actually managing it smoothly is an art. And it does help us to just concentrate on the content rather than worrying about the bits around the outside, which are about getting you from A to B. So actually, that's great. I also wanted to thank Stan and his Excerpts by Experience group. I spent an hour with them, was it last week or the week before? Just in preparation for the conference, and I mean, a great bunch of articulate people who actually are able, I think, really to help this cause, and we see them helping this cause, and will continue to do so. And I think it's quite clear that it adds a dimension to care and to what we do that probably talking about your average GP surgery doesn't have, and maybe they should have in a different way. So thanks very much for that. That's great. Thank you very much, Simon. You've guided us through all this with enormous intelligence, sometimes made us think even more than we were already. So that's great. Very, very packed 2 days this has been. I do hope that, I can't believe anybody hasn't learned something new. Certainly I have, and I always do. Or if they haven't heard something new, the things that you're doing have been challenged in some way. And just importantly, that you perhaps connected with somebody new or been inspired to take something home with you from what you've heard. And hopefully you can follow up those things and take the opportunity to follow them up. I think that for Pathway, I mean, Alex mentioned earlier that we're exploring, well, we're not exploring, we're suggesting that actually you help us fund this, and that's really great. I mean, I have to say, from my perspective, I find it quite shocking that an organisation like Pathway is really pretty hand-to-mouth in many ways, I don't mean the faculty, I mean generally the work. And we really do need some kind of certainty in order to be able to actually progress. And I didn't feel I got that yesterday from, was it this morning? I didn't feel I got that this morning from Steve Pullis at all. In fact, I was left feeling rather uncertain about the future of this kind of work in many ways. We end up, like I'm sure a lot of you do, going to trusts and foundations, begging bowl really, to ask for funding. And they often say one of two things. They'll say, well, are you doing anything new? And we'll say, well, actually, an awful lot of what we do is new and innovative. And they say, no, but you did that last year. And then they'll say, well, actually, yes, we will fund you, but only for a very short period of time. Or they'll say, we think your work should be funded by the NHS. And we're in a wonderful bind there, which at some point we're going to have to find a way out of. Don't like to be negative, but I think that actually we do need to worry about that and how we actually manage to continue this work. I suppose it's in the nature really of these conferences that we're already thinking about plans for next year. And if you've got your diaries to hand, pencil in the 11th and 12th of March 2020 for our next gathering. We've talked for several years about shifting out of London. And in fact, we have got a firm invitation to go to Leeds for the conference next year. But we would like to know what you think. And tell us what you think about that and give us some feedback. Generally, that kind of segues me into the glorious feedback forms. We really do need you to fill in those feedback forms. Tell us what you've liked, tell us what you haven't liked, tell us whether we've got the balance between talks from a platform to workshops about right. We're obviously building the faculty as we go. And again, we need feedback. Tell us what we should be doing. Tell us what would really help you in your practice. Finally, We started yesterday exploring the broad political context and what government should do and what perhaps it's failing to do. And this morning, as I said, we had Steve Powers talking about what the NHS in England intends to do to help. Not sure I got an answer to that. And in our closing session, we've seen how compassionate, values-driven health at the front line makes such a difference to our patients, and how absolutely critical that kind of approach to healthcare is. I think the other thing about this conference is everywhere we look, and all the sessions we've had are just full of example and evidence about what works, absolutely full of it. And I just wanted to just think a bit about that whole issue of evidence. And I think Kate Pickett said yesterday that evidence was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. Steve Powers gave a line about present us with the evidence. Well, I think we've got an awful lot of evidence. It seems absolutely clear to me that, alas, we're not in a situation where evidence in its own is going to count with many politicians. And I don't think we need to actually travel across to Washington for a proof of why evidence isn't actually bearing a lot of fruit at the moment. I think you can see that much closer to home. So we have to be aware that evidence on its own is not enough. So one of the things we have to be is we have to be noisy, we have to campaign, we have to annoy people, and I think we have to be angry from time to time as well. One of the things that Gina said, be system disruptors. I mean, that's a better word, a better phrase than angry. I'll stick on angry, but let's do angry as a system disruptor. That's all I wanted to say really about that. As ever, I was just most struck at this conference by the kind of tangible commitment that you can feel. And perhaps sometimes that tangible commitment doesn't allow for a lot of disruption and anger. But somehow we've got to get both of those two things in the room at the same time to go forward. Thank you, really, everybody, for your contributions, for everything that's happened over the last 2 days. Have a safe journey home. I hope that you take a lot with you. And please, that person, I can't see her, going to take your credit cards on the way out. That would be very good indeed. Thank you very much.